7 German scouts dead before sunrise. Single shooter, impossible angle. The officers examined the bodies, traced the bullet trajectories, and stared at the farm 200 meters away. The math didn't work. The fence line blocked any direct shot. The barn had no windows facing the kill zone. Yet 7 men lay dead, each hit from the same position, each killed within 90 seconds. And the only explanation came from a Finnish farmer they dismissed as useless 3 days earlier. It was January 1940. The Winter War. Finland versus the Soviet Union. The small Nordic nation fighting desperately against Stalin's Red Army, a force that outnumbered them 3-1 in men, 30-1 in aircraft, and possessed unlimited artillery. The world expected Finland to collapse within weeks. But the Finns had something the Soviets didn't. Intimate knowledge of their own land, every forest, every frozen lake, every farm and field. They knew the terrain the way a man knows his own hands, and they used that knowledge to kill. Alexei Vertanin was 52 years old, a farmer from a Karelian region, near the Soviet border. He'd lived his entire life on the same land his father and grandfather had worked, knew every tree, every stone, every subtle rise and depression in the ground. When the war started and the Red Army pushed across the border, Alexei didn't flee. He stayed, not from bravery. He'd be the first to say that, but from stubbornness. This was his land, his home, and he'd be damned if he let foreign soldiers take it without a fight. The Finnish army swept through recruiting farmers, hunters, anyone who could shoot. Alexei could shoot. He'd been hunting elk and bear for 40 years. Knew ballistics instinctively, the way farmers know weather. He could judge distance by eye, calculate wind drift without thinking, and place a bullet exactly where he wanted from 300 meters. The army gave him a Mosin-Nagant rifle, iron sights, and assigned him to an irregular unit defending the Karelian front. But the officers didn't know what to do with him. Alexei was old, slow. He didn't follow orders quickly, didn't understand military protocol. He argued with lieutenants about tactics, insisted his way was better, and refused positions he thought were wrong. After 2 weeks, his commanding officer, a young captain from Helsinki, had enough. "You're impossible to work with," the captain said bluntly. "You question every order. You don't respect rank. You treat this like a hunting trip." "It is a hunting trip," Alexei replied, "except the animals shoot back. This is war, not a forest. We have structure, discipline, chain of command. And I have 40 years knowing this land. I'm telling you, the positions you're assigning are wrong. The Soviets will flank them, will walk right through." The captain's patience snapped. "Fine. You know better? Prove it. Take your rifle. Find your own position. Kill Russians. Just stay out of my way." It was meant as dismissal, punishment, even, sending the difficult old farmer off alone, so the real soldiers could work. But Alexei took it seriously. He returned to his farm, now abandoned, sitting in no man's land between Finnish and Soviet lines, surveyed the land, thought about angles, approaches, killing zones. And he noticed something the officers hadn't: a cracked fence board. The fence ran along the eastern edge of his property. Old wood, weathered gray, separating his field from the forest beyond. One board, near the corner post, had split vertically, not broken off, just cracked, creating a gap maybe 2 inches wide. Nothing significant. Alexei had meant to replace it for months, but never got around to it. Now, studying it tactically, he saw something else: a perfect rifle port. The crack was positioned so that looking through it, you could see a section of forest trail the Soviets were using for reconnaissance patrols. But from the trail, the crack was invisible, just another weathered board on an abandoned farm fence. No muzzle flash would be visible through such a narrow gap. No shooter silhouette. Nothing to draw or return fire. It was, Alexei realized, a natural hide. Better than anything you could engineer. He tested the angle. Lay prone behind the fence, rifle barrel just touching crack, sighted through his iron sights. The view was narrow but clear. He could see 70 meters of trail. Any Soviet patrol using that route would be visible for approximately 8 seconds. That was the window. 8 seconds to identify targets, aim, fire, and drop as many men as possible before they scattered. But when Alexei reported this to the captain, explaining the geometry and advantage, the young officer dismissed it immediately. A fence crack. The captain's tone was incredulous. You want to base a defensive position on a crack in a fence? It's perfect concealment, sir. They can't see the shooter, can't return fire effectively, and the angle covers their primary reconnaissance route. It covers 70 meters of trail. That's nothing. We need positions that control larger areas, that provide strategic depth. With respect, sir, strategic depth doesn't matter if they don't know where you're shooting from. This crack gives me. Enough. The captain cut him off. I don't have time for this. We have real defensive positions to establish. You want to sit behind a fence shooting at a trail? Fine. Do it. But don't expect support. Don't expect ammunition resupply. You're on your own. Again meant as dismissal. But Alexei just nodded. Understood, sir. I'll be at the fence. He returned to his farm that night, set up his position carefully, cleared snow from behind the fence, so he could lie flat, arrange his ammunition, 60 rounds, all he'd been issued, prepared sight lines, measuring distances to various points on the trail using landmarks he'd known for decades. A birch tree with a split trunk, 80 meters. A large boulder, 95 meters. A slight rise where the trail crested, 110 meters. He memorized them, built a mental map, and then he waited. The first Soviet patrol came at dawn. 7 men, moving quietly through the forest in single file. Soviet scouts conducting reconnaissance before a larger advance. They wore white winter camouflage, carried submachine guns, and moved with the cautious confidence of professionals. They'd done this before, slipped through finish lines, mapped positions, reported back. Standard procedure. Low risk. The forest felt empty. The farm ahead looked abandoned. Nothing threatening. Alexei watched them through the fence crack. His breathing was slow, controlled, heart rate steady. This wasn't his first shot. He'd killed men before, 3 Soviet soldiers in previous engagements. But this was different. This was 7 targets in 8 seconds. Maybe 9 seconds if they were slow to react. But no more. After the first shot, they'd scatter, return fire. His advantage would collapse. He selected his first target, the patrol leader, walking third in line. Standard Soviet doctrine placed experienced soldiers in middle positions. Take him first. Disrupt command. The range was 85 meters. Slight wind from the north, maybe 3 kilometers per hour. Temperature well below freezing, which meant the air was dense. The bullet would fly true. Alexei's finger touched the trigger. He exhaled halfway, held it, and fired. The report cracked through the dawn silence. The patrol leader dropped instantly, killed before he heard the shot. The crack in the fence was narrow enough that the muzzle flash was invisible from the trail. The other 6 Soviets froze for a critical half-second. The pause where the brain tries to process unexpected violence. That pause killed them. Alexei worked the bolt. Smooth, fast. 40 years of hunting muscle memory. Acquired the second target, a soldier diving for cover. Fired. The man jerked and went still. Third target, running, panic setting in. Alexei led him slightly, accounting for movement. Fired. The soldier fell mid-stride. Fourth target. Fifth. Sixth. Each shot deliberate, precise, spaced 2 seconds apart. The Mosin-Nagin's bolt action was slower than a semi-automatic, but Alexei's hands moved with practiced efficiency. The 7th man broke and ran. Smart. Survival instinct overriding training. He sprinted back down the trail, weaving between trees. Alexei tracked him calmly, waiting for a clear window. The runner passed behind a thick pine, emerged. Alexei fired. The shot took him in the back. He fell forward into the snow and didn't move. 90 seconds. 7 dead. Alexei remained motionless behind the fence, waiting, listening, watching for movement. Nothing. The forest was silent again, except for wind through frozen branches. He carefully backed away from the fence, staying low, and relocated 20 meters to a secondary position he'd prepared. Standard procedure. Never stay where you shot from. The Soviets would send more men, would try to locate the shooter. Better to be elsewhere when they came. But they didn't come. Not immediately. The Soviet command was confused. The reconnaissance patrol had been killed from an impossible angle. Officers examined the bodies that afternoon. 7 kills, 7 headshots or center mass hits, all from the same direction. But that direction pointed toward an abandoned farm with no clear line of sight. The fence blocked any prone shooter. The barn had no windows. The house was collapsed. Where had the shots come from? A Soviet lieutenant walked the fence, studied it, saw nothing unusual, just old wooden boards. He stood exactly where Alexei had been lying and looked toward the trail. The fence blocked his view completely. He returned to his commander and reported, "No viable shooting position. The fence line has no gaps. The angle doesn't work." They concluded the shooter must have been elsewhere, perhaps in a tree, perhaps in a hidden pit. They marked the area as dangerous, but didn't understand the threat. And that misunderstanding would kill more of them. 3 days later, another patrol used the same trail. 5 men this time, more cautious. They'd been briefed about the previous ambush, told to stay alert. But they didn't know where the danger was, couldn't identify the threat, and they walked into Alexei's sights again. This time he killed 4. The 5th man reacted fast enough to die behind a tree before Alexei could acquire him. The Soviets stayed pinned there for 20 minutes, terrified, until reinforcements arrived. When they extracted him, he was questioned extensively. Where was the shooter? Officers demanded. The farm, the soldier gasped. Somewhere near the farm. Where at the farm? Which building? I don't know. I didn't see anything. Just heard shots. Saw my comrades fall. Was the shooter elevated? In a window? Behind cover? I don't know. The soldier was near panic. I never saw him. Never saw a muzzle flash. Nothing. Just death from nowhere. The Soviet command began calling the position the Ghost Fence. Patrols were rerouted. The trail was abandoned. They'd lost 11 men to an invisible shooter in a location they couldn't identify. It was tactically insignificant. 11 soldiers from an army of hundreds of thousands, but psychologically devastating. The story spread. Soviet troops talked about it, whispered about it. The Ghost Fence where men died, and no one ever saw the shooter. Fear is contagious in war, and fear makes soldiers hesitant, makes them slow, makes them vulnerable. The Finnish captain heard about it through intelligence reports. Soviet radio chatter mentioned the Ghost Fence repeatedly. Command was frustrated. Patrols refused to use eastern routes. When the captain realized the location matched Alexei's farm, he made a field visit. He found the old farmer behind his fence, rifle resting against the wood, calmly eating bread and dried fish. "You," the captain said, "you've been killing them from here?" "Yes, sir." "How many?" 11 confirmed, maybe 12. One I'm not certain about. The captain stared at the fence, at the field, at the forest beyond. "Show me your position." Alexei led him to the crack, showed him the narrow gap, explained the geometry, the angles, the concealment. The captain knelt, looked through the crack, and saw the trail clearly. Then he stood and looked at the fence from the outside. Saw nothing, just solid fence boards. "My God," he whispered, "they can't see it." "No, sir. That's why it works." The captain studied the position for 20 minutes, walked the perimeter, checked sight lines from multiple angles, examined the fence crack up close, just a natural split in aging wood, 2 inches wide, completely invisible from the front. It was brilliant in its simplicity. No engineering, no construction, just an old farmer noticing what no one else had. That broken things sometimes create perfect opportunities. "Why didn't you tell me it was this effective?" the captain asked finally. "I did tell you, sir. You said it was useless. Said I was wasting time." The captain had the grace to look embarrassed. "I thought you were being difficult. Stubborn old man who wouldn't follow orders." "I am a stubborn old man," Alexei agreed. "But I also know this land. Know how light works through fence boards. Know where animals walk and why. Soviets are just bigger animals. They use the same trails, follow the same logic, avoid the same obstacles. You're treating this like hunting, because it is hunting. You city soldiers think war is about formations and strategies. Out here, it's simpler. You find where the enemy walks. You wait. You shoot. That's all. The captain was quiet for a moment. Then, can you teach this? Can other soldiers use this position? Alexei shook his head. Wrong question, sir. This specific position only works here. But the principle works everywhere. You don't need perfect sniper nests or engineered hides. You need to look at what's already there. Broken windows, collapsed walls, fence gaps. Nature builds cover everywhere. You just have to see it. The captain understood immediately. This wasn't about one position. It was about a mindset, about using the environment instead of fighting against it, about finding advantage in damage and decay rather than only in strength. It was a Finnish way of war, using the land itself as a weapon. I need you to train others, the captain said. Show them how to see what you see. I'm not a teacher. You don't have to teach. Just take soldiers to positions. Show them what you'd use. Let them learn by watching. Alexei considered, finally nodded. I can do that, but they have to listen, have to be willing to use broken things instead of perfect things. Over the next 2 weeks, Alexei took small groups of Finnish soldiers through the region, showed them his fence crack position, but more importantly, showed them how to look at terrain differently. A collapsed barn became a sniper hide with perfect overhead concealment. A frozen stream's embankment provided defilade that was invisible until you were right on top of it. A lightning-struck tree with a split trunk created a natural rifle rest and firing port. Most soldiers got immediately. They were Finns, farmers, hunters, loggers. They understood land, understood that war in their own country meant using their knowledge against invaders who didn't have it. But a few struggled. City boys who thought tactically but not practically, who wanted to engineer positions instead of finding them. One young soldier from Helsinki kept trying to improve Alexei's positions. We should reinforce this, he'd say. Or, we should clear that vegetation for better sight lines. Alexei would stop him every time. Why? Alexei would ask. To make it better, more effective. Better how? You clear that vegetation. The Soviets see it's been cleared. Know someone's using this position. You reinforce the fence. It looks different from the rest. Stands out. You want to make things look military. Go ahead. But then the enemy knows where you are. Better to use what's already broken. What already looks like nothing. The lesson stuck. The soldier stopped trying to improve and started trying to notice. That shift from engineering to observation changed how he fought, changed how they all fought. By February, the ghost fence tactic had spread to the Finnish irregular forces. Soldiers were finding their own broken fence boards, collapsed walls, split trees. They'd set up in positions that looked like nothing, wait for Soviet patrols, and kill from angles the enemy couldn't anticipate. Soviet casualties from snipers increased dramatically. But more importantly, Soviet morale cracked. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, dying in places that looked empty, killed by positions that shouldn't exist. Soviet command tried to adapt. They sent counter-sniper teams, brought in their own sharpshooters to hunt the Finnish ghosts. But the counter-snipers were looking for traditional positions, elevated hides, concealed bunkers, camouflage nests. They weren't looking for fence cracks and broken barns, weren't thinking about using damage as advantage. And so they died too, shot by farmers hiding behind things that looked like nothing. Alexei himself killed 32 confirmed Soviet soldiers during the Winter War, all from improvised positions, all from angles the enemy dismissed as impossible. His fence crack position accounted for 18 of those kills before the Soviets finally stopped using that forest trail entirely. But by then, Alexei had moved to other positions, other broken things that no one else noticed. The Winter War ended in March 1940. Finland lost territory but maintained independence. A victory of sorts, given the odds. The Soviets had expected collapse within weeks. Instead, they fought for 3 months, lost hundreds of thousands of men, and gained far less than they planned. The Finnish resistance became legendary. Stories of soldiers appearing from nowhere, killing from impossible angles, and vanishing back into snow and forest. Alexei returned to farming after the war, repaired his fence, including the cracked board. He didn't keep it as a memorial, didn't think of it as significant. It was just a broken board. He replaced it with fresh wood and moved on. But other soldiers remembered. The tactic spread. Military doctrine began, including improvised hides in training, teaching soldiers to look for natural cover instead of only building it. Years later, a military historian visited Alexei, asked about the ghost fence, about his tactics, about how he thought to use a fence crack as a sniper position. "I didn't think about it," Alexei said. "I just saw it, saw the crack and saw the trail, and understood they connected. That's not tactics. That's just noticing." But other soldiers didn't notice. Trained officers didn't notice. "You did. Why?" Alexei thought about the question. Finally said, "Because I wasn't trying to fight like a soldier. Soldiers think about strength, about building positions and establishing fields of fire. Hunters think about patience, about waiting where the animal will walk. I was a hunter. The Soviets were animals. So I hunted them." The historian pressed. "But it's more than that. You saw tactical advantage in something broken, something damaged. Most people see damage as weakness." "Most people are wrong," Alexei replied. "Broken things are useful. Crack in a fence lets you see through. Collapsed barn gives you overhead cover you don't have to build. Split tree holds your rifle steady. The world is full of broken things. If you only use perfect things, you miss most of your opportunities." That statement became a teaching principle, not just in Finnish military doctrine, but internationally. The idea that damage and decay could be tactical assets spread through military thinking. Snipers began specifically looking for improvised hides in urban environments. Guerrilla forces in later conflicts adopted the principle. Use what exists. Don't build what you can find. Hide in plain sight by using things the enemy thinks are insignificant. But the lesson was deeper than tactics. It was philosophical. Alexei's fence crack represented a different way of seeing the world, not through the lens of perfection and engineering, but through the lens of adaptation and opportunism. The Soviet army came with overwhelming force, perfect equipment, superior numbers, and they lost not completely, but far more than they should have, because they didn't understand the land, didn't understand that the Finns weren't fighting with strength, but with knowledge, with familiarity, with the ability to see advantage in things that looked like nothing. The young captain who dismissed Alexei's position went on to become a colonel. He carried the lesson his entire career. In later conflicts, the Continuation War, the Lapland War, he emphasized array knowledge and improvised positions. Never assumed the obvious approach was the only approach. Never dismissed soldiers who saw things differently. And he credited an old farmer with teaching him the most important lesson of his military life. That wisdom often comes from unexpected places, and the people you dismiss might be the ones who save you. Alexei Vertanen died in 1968 at 80 years old. He lived his entire life on the same farm, same land, same fields. He never left Finland, never sought recognition, never told stories about the war unless directly asked. And even then, he'd keep it brief. "I shot some Russians from behind the fence. They died. That's all." But it wasn't all. His approach, his way of seeing, influenced generations of soldiers. The ghost fence became legend. Military academies used it as a case study. The idea that one farmer with a broken fence could kill dozens of trained soldiers and disrupt an entire military operation became proof of a larger principle, that asymmetric warfare isn't about superior force. It's about superior knowledge, about using what you have, no matter how broken or insignificant, better than the enemy expects. There's a memorial now in the Karelian region. Small plaque near where Alexei's farm once stood. The fence is gone. The land has changed hands multiple times. But the plaque remains. It reads, "Here, a farmer defended his land with patience and a crack in a fence. 32 invaders fell. The land remembers. Tourists visit sometimes. Military historians. Students of warfare. They stand where the fence once was and try to imagine the angle. Try to visualize how a man lying prone behind weathered could kill 7 soldiers in 90 seconds. And most can't picture it, can't understand how it worked. Because they're thinking like soldiers, not hunters. Thinking about strength, not patience. Thinking about perfect positions, not broken boards. But some understand. The farmers understand. The hunters. The people who spent their lives noticing small things. The way light moves through gaps. The way wind shifts around obstacles. The way animals follow the same paths because the land dictates it. Those people look at the memorial and nod. They get it. They see what Alexei saw. That the world is full of opportunities hiding in plain sight. You just have to be patient enough to notice them. The lesson extends beyond warfare. Alexei's fence crack is a metaphor for how resilience works. How the weak defeat the strong. How knowledge trumps power. How paying attention to details everyone else ignores can be the difference between victory and defeat. The Soviets had tanks, planes, artillery, and millions of soldiers. Alexei had a cracked fence board in 40 years of knowing his own land. And for a brief period, in a small corner of the war, Alexei won. That's not to romanticize war. Alexei never did. He'd be the first to say that war is waste. That the 32 men he killed were someone's sons and brothers and fathers. That violence is tragedy regardless of who's shooting or why. But he'd also say that when war comes to your land, when you have no choice but to fight or flee, you use what you have. And if what you have is knowledge and a cracked fence, then that's enough. It has to be enough. The Soviet soldiers who survived encounters with the ghost fence went home with stories. About invisible snipers and impossible angles. About forests that killed and fields that hid death. Some of those soldiers wrote memoirs. One, translated in the 1990s, includes a passage. We feared the Finnish winter, feared the cold and snow. But more than that, we feared the quiet. The empty farms and silent forests where death waited behind things we couldn't see. We had artillery and numbers. They had the land. And the land always wins in the end. That soldier was right. The land does win, not because terrain is magical or invincible, but because the side that knows the land, that understands its rhythms and features and hidden opportunities, has an advantage no amount of firepower can overcome. Alexei understood that, and he used it. 32 confirmed kills, 1 cracked fence board, and a lesson that echoes through military history. Never dismiss the broken things. Sometimes they're exactly what you need. In modern military training, instructors still reference Alexei Vertanen. Not by name usually. The story has been absorbed into doctrine, stripped of individual identity, reduced to principle. But the lesson remains. Improvised positions using damaged or naturally occurring cover can be more effective than engineer hides. Urban warfare manuals teach soldiers to look for cracks, gaps, and irregular openings. Sniper schools emphasize environmental opportunism, the practice of finding and exploiting cover the enemy won't anticipate. But something's been lost in the translation from Alexei's experience to modern doctrine. The institutional military wants to systematize everything. Turn intuition into procedure. Make Alexei's observation into a checklist. Step 1. Scan for damaged structures. Step 2. Assess sightlines. Step 3. Calculate angles. That approach misses a point. Alexei didn't follow steps. He didn't calculate. He just knew. Knew from decades of living on that land. Knew from understanding how light and shadow and human movement worked in that specific place. You can't teach that kind of knowledge in a classroom. Can't replicate it with PowerPoint slides and field exercises. It comes from time, from familiarity, from a slow accumulation of observation that only happens when you stay in one place long enough to see patterns. Modern militaries rotate soldiers constantly, deploy them to foreign countries, train them on unfamiliar ground, and then they wonder why local insurgents, who've lived their entire lives on that same ground, keep winning engagements despite inferior equipment. The answer is Alexei's fence. The local fighters know where the cracks are, know which walls are weak enough to shoot through, know which alleys flood in rain, and which stay dry. Know where light falls at dawn and where shadows hide movement at dusk. That knowledge is power. And no amount of technology or training can replicate decades of simply paying attention. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, but illustrates the point about American soldiers in Afghanistan. They kept taking fire from a village they cleared multiple times. Intelligence said no insurgents. Satellite imagery showed no weapons. But soldiers kept dying. Finally, a local interpreter explained, "They're shooting through the courtyard walls. The walls have cracks. You can't see them from outside, but from inside, you can see through perfectly." The Americans checked. The interpreter was right. Hairline cracks in mud brick walls, invisible from the exterior, provided perfect firing ports. The insurgents would slip into cleared buildings, shoot through the cracks, and disappear. The Americans had been looking for windows and doors, obvious firing positions. They'd missed the broken things. Missed what locals had known for generations, that old walls crack, and cracks let you see without being seen. That's Alexi's lesson playing out 70 years later on different terrain. The principle doesn't change. Familiarity beats strength. Knowledge beats firepower. And the side willing to use broken things has advantages the enemy with perfect equipment will never notice. But there's a darker side to this lesson too. Because if broken things provide tactical advantage, then breaking things becomes strategy. If damaged walls and collapsed buildings and cracked fences offer better cover than intact structures, then preserving damage becomes military doctrine. In some modern conflicts, forces deliberately maintain ruins. Don't rebuild destroyed neighborhoods. Leave rubble in place. Because rubble provides concealment. Because ruins create ambiguity. Because destroyed cities favor defenders who know them over attackers who don't. Alexei never thought about that. He used a cracked fence because it was there, not because he'd engineered its existence. But his success demonstrated a principle that, taken to its logical extreme, incentivizes destruction. If broken things win wars, why fix them? That's a troubling conclusion. A perversion of Alexei's simple observation. But it's where doctrine sometimes leads when divorced from human context. The truth is more nuanced. Alexei's fence worked because it was unexpected. Because it looked insignificant. Because the Soviets didn't think a broken board could matter. But if broken boards become standard doctrine, if every crack becomes suspected firing position, then the advantage disappears. The enemy starts checking everything, starts treating all damage as potential threat, and suddenly the broken fence is just another position to suppress with artillery. That's what happened in Finland by late February 1940. Soviet forces, after losing men to improvised positions repeatedly, changed tactics. They stopped using predictable patrol routes, started treating every abandoned structure as hostile, began suppressing potential sniper positions with heavy weapons before advancing. The ghost fence approach still worked sometimes, but its effectiveness decreased. The enemy adapted, always do, eventually. Alexei understood that too. He never claimed his tactic was invincible, never said it would win the war. He just said it would kill some Russians. And it did. 32 confirmed. Maybe more. That was enough for him. He wasn't trying to revolutionize warfare. Wasn't thinking about doctrine or strategy. He was trying to defend his farm. And for that limited personal objective, a cracked fence was perfect. That's the real lesson. Not that broken things are superior to whole things, but that the right tool depends on the task. Alexei's fence was perfect for defending one specific section of forest against patrols using one specific trail. It wasn't perfect for every situation. Wouldn't work in open terrain. Wouldn't work against armored vehicles. Wouldn't work if the enemy knew about it. But for that moment, for that place, for that enemy, it was exactly right. Military history is full of similar examples. Tactics that worked brilliantly once and then never again. Innovations that exploited temporary advantage. The lesson isn't to find the one perfect trick. It's to stay adaptable, to keep observing, to keep noticing what others miss. Alexei wasn't a genius. He was just paying attention. And that attention, applied consistently over decades, gave him knowledge no Soviet soldier could match. When the historian visited Alexei years after the war, and asked what he was most proud of. Alexei's answer was surprising. That I fixed the fence. After the war, I replaced that crackboard with good wood. People wanted me to leave it, said it was historic, but it was broken, so I fixed it. A fence should work properly. That response captures everything about Alexei's mindset. He wasn't sentimental, wasn't interested in glory or legend. He used a broken fence because it was there and it was useful. When the war ended and it was no longer useful, he fixed it. Because that's what you do with broken things when you don't need them broken anymore. Today, the principle Alexei demonstrated appears in military doctrine under terms like environmental exploitation and indigenous advantage. But those sterile phrases miss the human reality. Alexei was a man who knew his land, who'd walked the same fields for 50 years, who understood instinctively that knowledge accumulated slowly is more powerful than technology acquired quickly. The cracked fence killed 7 men at dawn because Alexei noticed what no one else did, not because he was smarter or better trained, but because he was paying attention, because he'd lived long enough in one place to see patterns, to understand how light moved through gaps, how trails formed where ground was easiest, how invaders would move the same way animals moved because terrain dictates behavior. That's not a lesson you can teach in a manual. It's a lesson learned through time and patience, through decades of observation, through the slow accumulation of knowledge that comes from staying still while the world changes around you. The Soviet Union had millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, unlimited artillery. They should have crushed Finland in weeks. But they didn't, because they didn't have Alexei, didn't have thousands of farmers and hunters who knew every tree and rock and cracked fence board in their homeland. That knowledge, intimate, detailed, earned through years of simply paying attention, was more valuable than all the Soviet armor combined. 7 men fell at dawn. 32 fell in total. To a farmer, to a cracked fence, to the power of knowing your ground better than the enemy knows theirs. Sometimes, that's all it takes. Sometimes, the broken things are exactly what you need. Subscribe for more stories like this.